The garden that bloomed in salt. On what the desert teaches. A gardener accustomed to rich black loam was banished, in punishment for a small crime, to a salt flat at the edge of the kingdom. The crime had been trivial. He had, in a moment of frustration, struck a tax collector who had been particularly officious about the levy on his roses. The tax collector had not been seriously injured. The matter would, in an ordinary court, have been settled with a small fine. But the tax collector had been the nephew of a magistrate, and the magistrate had been in a mood, and the gardener had been sentenced, in a perfunctory hearing, to 10 years of banishment to a salt flat in the eastern marches. He was 61 when he went. He had been, in his green valley, a gardener of some reputation. He had taught at the kingdom's small horticultural school. He had developed 3 varieties of rose that bore his name. He had, in his middle decades, advised the Queen's chief gardener on the planning of the royal gardens. He was, in his village, a man whose advice was sought on every matter of cultivation. He took with him to the salt flat the seeds he had brought from his garden, his 3 roses, his prized tomatoes, his particular lavender, his beloved scented mint. He took his trowel and his hoe and his copper watering can, which had been his father's and his father's father's. He took his knowledge of 40 years. He set up a small camp at the edge of the salt flat. The kingdom provided him with a small hut, the bare necessities of a kitchen, and a single visit by a wagon every 2 months bringing dried food. He was not, in his banishment, permitted to leave the salt flat. He was not permitted to receive visitors. He was permitted to garden. The magistrate, who had not been entirely a bad man, had specified this in the sentence as a particular ironic flourish. He worked the salt for a year. He turned it. He used his hoe to break the white crust. He gathered from beneath the crust the small amount of dust that had settled in the depressions. He mixed this with what little dung he could find from the small lizards that lived on the flat and from the 2 goats the kingdom had given him for milk. He carried water from a distant spring, a small spring he had discovered, perhaps a mile from his hut after a month of searching. He carried it in his copper can, 2 cans a day, and watered the small patch of salt he had decided to make his garden. He planted his seeds in careful rows. Nothing grew. The salt killed everything he put in it. The roses did not sprout. The tomatoes did not sprout. The lavender did not sprout. The mint did not sprout. He dug the seeds up after a month and examined them. They had simply rotted in the salt, without germinating, without struggling. The salt did not care about his 3 roses. The salt did not care about his 40 years. He cursed the salt. He cursed it in the language of his green valley, which had a particular vocabulary for cursing soils. He cursed it in the older language his grandmother had taught him, which had cursings reserved for water and for stones and for skies. He cursed the kingdom that had banished him. He cursed the magistrate. He cursed the tax collector who had been the nephew. He cursed the small crime, the lifting of his hand at the assessment on a hot afternoon with a man who had been provoking him. He cursed himself. He had not, in his 61 years, been the kind of man who lifted his hand. He had been, until that afternoon, a man known for his patience. The lifting of the hand had been, in some sense, the betrayal of his own nature. He had been, since then, trying to understand why he had done it. He had not, in a year of banishment, understood. He had only the salt. In the 2nd year, exhausted, he stopped trying. He had used up in the 1st year his seeds, his strength, his cursings. He had nothing left to plant. The supply wagon brought him, every 2 months, dried food, but it did not bring him seeds. He had not, on departure, thought to ask for more, and the kingdom did not, in its records, list him as a man who required additional seeds. He sat on a rock in the middle of the salt. He did nothing. He did this for the whole of the 2nd year. He drew water. He ate his dried food. He milked his goats. He sat. The rock he sat on was a small dark rock in the middle of the white flat, and he had come to know it well. It was warm in the morning, cool in the afternoon, cold at night. He had taken to sitting on it for several hours each day, watching the flat. The flat did not, in the 2nd year, do anything dramatic. It did, however, slowly become visible to him in a way it had not been in the 1st year. He had spent the first year fighting it. He had not, in the first year, looked at it. He had only seen it as a problem to be solved, a bad soil to be amended, a poor field to be improved. In the second year, he looked at it. He saw in his looking that it was not a wasteland. It was a particular kind of land with its own structure. There were depressions where the salt was denser and depressions where it was thinner. There were, in certain places, very small grasses he had not, in the first year, noticed, grasses the color of salt themselves, almost invisible, growing in tiny tufts. There were lizards of a particular kind that lived among the grasses, and that he had previously confused with the small lizards he gathered for dung. On closer inspection, they were different. There were, at sunset, very small flying insects that emerged from the salt itself, in great clouds, and were eaten by bats that came in from somewhere. There were, at night, when he could not sleep and walked the flat, the prints of small creatures he had never seen, long-legged, three-toed, leaving a particular pattern in the salt that he found, in his second year, beautiful. He had been living, in his first year, on a land he had been trying to make into another land. In his second year, he was living on the land that was there. In the third year, on a morning he had not been expecting any morning to be different from any other, a low silver flower bloomed all across the salt. He had been at his rock. He had risen, as usual, at sunrise. He had walked the short distance from his hut to the rock with his small cup of tea. He had sat down. He had looked out across the flat. The flowers were everywhere. There were thousands of them, tens of thousands. They were low to the ground, no taller than his thumb. They were silver, not white, not grey, but silver with a particular sheen that caught the early light. They had 6 petals each, arranged in a perfect star. They had a small dark center. They did not have, that he could see, any leaves. He stood up. He walked very carefully into the field of flowers. He had not in 3 years on the flat seen any flower. He had assumed in his first year that no flower could grow in the salt. He had been correct in his way. No flower from his green valley could grow in the salt. But these flowers were not from his green valley. He had never seen one. He had never planted one. He did not know its name. He bent down to the nearest flower. "Where did you come from?" he asked. "I was always here," said the flower. The gardener sat down on the salt beside it. The flower was perhaps half the size of his thumbnail. It was speaking in a voice he could only just hear, a small voice, the voice of a thing very small, but clear, as if it had been waiting for some time to speak and had practiced what it would say. "The salt is my soil," said the flower. "I cannot grow in loam. I cannot grow where you have known how to grow. I have been here in some form for as long as the flat has been a flat. We do not bloom every year. We bloom only when the conditions are right. The conditions are a particular kind of patience in the salt, a particular kind of stillness, and the presence, for 2 years, of a human being who has stopped trying to make us into something we are not. We bloom for the human. We bloom because, in 2 years of not being interfered with, the salt has settled into a particular alignment that we can use. We have used it. We are blooming. We will bloom each spring now for as long as you are here. How did I help? You stopped trying. You spent 2 years sitting. The sitting created the conditions. We do not need much. We need only that a particular kind of human being live near us for some years without trying to amend our soil. Most humans who come to the flat do not last that long. They despair. They go home if they can. They die if they cannot. They do not, in either case, stay long enough for us to bloom. You stayed, you stopped, we bloomed. The gardener wept. He had not in 3 years wept. He had cursed in the first year. He had sat in the second. He had not had in either the kind of moisture in his chest that produced tears. The flowers, somehow in their blooming, had returned the moisture. He stayed on the salt flat for the rest of his life. He sent word back to the kingdom with the next supply wagon that he did not wish to return at the end of his sentence. The kingdom received the word with some confusion. No one had ever, in the history of the banishment, refused to return. The magistrate who had sentenced him was, by then, dead. The new magistrate sent a reply asking him to explain himself. He did not reply. The flowers came back every spring. They could not, he found, be transplanted. He tried in his 5th year to take a small clump to his small herb garden by the hut. They died within a day. He tried again in his 6th year more carefully. They died again. He understood by then that they were not, in the deep sense, plants in the way the plants of his valley were. They were the salt blooming. They could not be moved any more than the salt itself could be moved. Travelers came in time from far countries to see them. The news had reached, somehow, the surrounding provinces that a banished gardener had, in the eastern flat, found a field of silver flowers that bloomed each spring. People came in small groups. They came on horses. They came on foot. They sat at the edge of the flat and looked at the flowers in respectful silence. They did not, on the whole, try to pick them. The gardener had explained gently that picking did not work. He did not charge admission. He sat on his rock. He watched the flowers. He watched the travelers. He was, in his last decade on the flat, happier than he had been in his 30 years in the Green Valley. He had become, in some way he could not have predicted, the keeper of a kind of beauty he had not known existed. He died at 83, on his rock, on a morning in spring, surrounded by the silver flowers. The travelers who happened to be at the flat that morning buried him in the salt, at his request, beneath the largest concentration of flowers. The flowers, the next spring, bloomed over his grave more densely than anywhere else on the flat. The flat is, in some province, still there. The flowers are, in some spring, still blooming. There is, in most generations, another banished gardener. What grows in salt cannot grow in loam. What you do not know how to grow is what is waiting for you. The desert is not punishment. The desert is the field of a different kind of flower. The work is to stop. The flowers come in the 3rd year. They cannot be transplanted. They are the salt blooming, not plants. The gardener who stays becomes the keeper of a beauty he had not known existed. He is, in his old age, happier than he was in the Green Valley. Most do not stay. The few who do are buried beneath the densest blooming VIII tales of the shattered persona.